The rings were the culmination of Sauron's plan to try and corrupt the elves, because after the fall of Morgoth, he's kind of bouncing around being like, well, I don't like that there's all this good stuff happening, so I need to try and make it stop. And men are really corruptible, but they're not very strong, so I'm going to try and go after the elves. So he comes up with this plan to uh, infiltrate the elves as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and he basically goes to Celebrimbor, who is Feanor's grandson. Although I don't know if it's explicitly clear through whom. I think it's Curanir or somebody like that. Anyways, he goes to Feanor's grandson and is like, "Hey, look, I know how to make really powerful rings." And so first so one thing is that it's kind of a throwaway line that Gandalf mentions there are a lot of lesser rings that are just plain gold bands, like the One Ring. And so there's like all these magical rings that are just kind of like scattered around Middle Earth. We don't ever see any of them. We don't really know what they do. Probably turn you invisible or something. I've always wondered if they also lose their power after the One Ring is destroyed, but who knows? Then they make the elves and Sauron make, what would that be? 16 rings of 16 rings of power, which eventually become the 9 and the 7. They are not created for men and dwarves. They're created for elves because Celebrimbor wants the elves to be able to preserve the goodness of their realms, and Sauron wants to be able to take the elves under his control. Then, in secret, the elves create, without Sauron's help, but still using his designs, which is important, they create the three, which are three unique rings that are untainted by Sauron and are given to Galadriel. One is given to the High King, Gil-galad, and one is given to Círdan. Then, after that, they all put on their rings. They're all like, we're preserving the elf realms and everything's great. And then Sauron goes off to Mordor and crafts the One Ring, the ruling ring. And all the elves immediately are like, oh, and take off the three. And that's actually something that they don't put the three rings back on and start using their power until after the battle of the last alliance, because they know that as long as Sauron has the ring, he can influence them via their rings. But he can't see their rings, but he can influence them. So Celebrimbor has the rings in Eregion, and then Sauron comes a knocking and basically destroys Eregion, brutally destroys Eregion, takes the 16 rings. Although, according to dwarven legends, Celebrimbor gives the Longbeard's ring to their king directly, not Sauron, but that only the dwarves say that, and of course they would. And so, yeah, like he like strings Celebrimbor up as a banner, Sauron does, and like basically tortures him to death. Then he goes off, and during all this time, like it's after he does all this that the Numenorians show up. They kick Sauron's butt. They take him back to Numenor, and which says a lot about the Numenorians because they beat Sauron while he has the ring, and it's like maybe it was him pulling his punches, but like it also genuinely could have been that the Numenorians were just that strong. And then
Yeah,
it's
that's
not.
crazy.
Yeah, no, the Numenorians are wild. And then eventually he basically causes the downfall of Numenor. And it's not until like years later, like a couple decades maybe after that, that the Battle of the Last Alliance happens, and Sauron is defeated. Isildur takes the One Ring, gets lost in the river, and at that point, the three Elven lords, who at this point Gil-galad had given his ring to Elrond for safekeeping during the battle. So then Elrond and Círdan and Galadriel have them, and then eventually Gandalf, when he arrives on Middle Earth, Círdan goes, "I like the cut of your jib. Here, have a magical ring." In more words than that. You're way better than the last guy that came through here." Um, so, which honestly, that is part of why Saruman is so jealous of Gandalf. Like, I don't think he ever knows explicitly that Gandalf has one of the rings, but in fact, I'm sure he doesn't know explicitly that Gandalf has one of the rings, but he kind of suspects that Gandalf has one of the rings. So anyway, so that's kind of the timeline of the rings. And yeah, I don't know. I think they're really interesting because of like they're magical artifacts and they do a lot of good. The elven rings do at least.